Hello, this is Yuki from We Learn to Share, and I'm going to be talking about nihilism in my presentation today. So, I'll be introducing nihilism, what it is, how it came to be, and how exactly we should try and understand it. So, on February 2015, there began a controversial global debate about the color of a dress. A picture of the dress in question had appeared on social media networking sites the previous day and divided extreme opinions as to whether it was blue and black or white and gold. Dressgate was the phenomenon that it was called, and it evoked distinct reactions from demographics globally, including among the most extreme existential crises. What is truth if we cannot decipher reality? And if so, is reality subjective? So these were the questions that arose. The very definition of reality is the world or the state of things as they actually naturally exist, meaning that reality is just factual. But if so, why cannot we understand truth? The aforementioned existential crisis brings up a question. If we cannot for certain understand, or at least try to understand, something as simple as the color of a dress, then what can we really know about anything at all, let alone concepts such as reality, religion, and the purpose of life? Of course, it would be foolish to assume that such philosophical sentiment was born from a viral picture in 2015. And, in truth, the philosophical sentiment was born actually over 2 millennials ago. So there's a ton of debate centering whether the ideology first came to fruition, but as from an article by Queen Mary University of London, we can at least speculate that nihilism began in the late 18th century to 20th century. So this era formed the basis for the philosophical doctrine that would come to be termed nihilism. So just hold that thought, and we're gonna go and try to understand what exactly nihilism is. So, part two, nihilism and its history. So, nihilism comes from the Latin root word nihil, which means nothing, which means not anything, which also means something that does not exist. So, Gen Z's adoption of nihilism is what I would like to call emo, but the genuine story of nihilism branches far deeper in complexity than that of a depressed teenager on Tumblr. Yeah, so when talking about clarity in the historical steps of most philosophical ideologies, it's important to understand that not everything is very set in stone. But the evidence shows that in the late 18th or 19th century, modernity came to its fullness, and with this maturation, the religious worldview began to fall away, revealing a crisis of meaning. Okay, what I mean by modernity is that there's a new age coming where we're relying more and more on facts. And what does this entail? So, when we're trying to understand nihilism, it's important to understand the what, right? So, it's not about what is nihilism, it's about what is the meaning of life. And as for nihilism, look at the left picture here. We all know the optimist, pessimist, half empty, half full glass perspective. But as for nihilism, the very peculiar thing about it is that nihilists say that why even try to understand this when there couldn't be a glass in itself? So this may be a bit confusing. But the answer is that there may be no glass at all. Yeah, so it's important to know also that in religious terms, in the 18th to 20th century, there's a major shift. So before this, life essentially was very meaningful, unlike nihilism. And when talking about religion, for the Buddhists and the Hindus, there is the endless cycle of life, karma, the next life, and it's like a pattern repeating time and time again. And you see, nihilism doesn't really work in the religious niche, right? Buddhism is a religion that is based on teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. The main principles of this belief system is karma, rebirth, and rebirth and impermanence, which means that you live, you die, you live, you die, and it's the endless cycle. And it's anything but meaningless. There's a lot of meaning in participating in this cycle. So put simply, the meaning of life in terms of religion is serving good, being good, right? So there's a term of committing a sin. We're supposed to be good, and that is the meaning of life. And in the case of Buddhism, achieving nirvana is something which can roughly be translated into enlightened one. And in the Western world of Christianity and many religions, there is a purpose, so to speak. But as modernism came to full fruition, this objective meaning starts to dissolve. In history, we see a vast majority of humanity get a better and better grasp of reality. As I said before, there's scientific ideologies that have arose. And as we get a better and better grasp of reality and no longer find the need to rely on divinities, or at least the majority of people start to sway away from divinities like God and try to find meaning of life by themselves. And obviously, seen from the context of nihilism, there is obviously a little bit of conflict. So next we're going to talk about a little bit of the pioneers that first helped the world understand what nihilism was. And there were a lot of pioneers that first went on to make this ideology a lot more mainstream. Some of them being David Strauss and Ludwig Feuerbach, I believe. And Strauss actually wrote a book called The Life of Jesus. And this essentially said that the Bible was nothing but a historical textbook. And Ludwig mentioned that God was a psychological projection of humanity. Okay, so what this means is that God may not actually exist, and that, as Feuerbach said, it's a psychological projection of humanity. And one person that I would say that comes not quite close to any of these people is 1859's Great Astonishment, which was Charles Darwin's Origin of Species. So what the Origin of Species stated was that we are all, in a way, ancestral. We all come from one being, right? So what this essentially means is that I could be existing in my own human self, in my own complex bodily system, but at the same time, I'm nothing more different than a mere ant walking across the street. Of course, there are a lot of scientific differences, but according to the Origin of Species, we all originate from a singular family tree, which means that we weren't designed specially. We weren't a creative product of natural design, but rather natural evolution. And this stirred a lot of people, and it also enlightened the world into thinking that perhaps there's another aspect to the story. So put simply, God was a source that clarified life when it didn't make any sense. that divinity and faith secured the people to allocate objective meaning of life. And it's important to say that while religion goes downhill, nihilism has also come uphill. So there's a lot of mismatch going on, and it's important to understand and clarify these points. Next, the branches of nihilism. So there are many types of nihilism. One of the leading ones is existential nihilism. So I will classify that there are relatively about 4 branches to nihilism, one being existential nihilism. What this means is that the belief that life has no inherent purpose. And next, we see a new wave of people mentioning metaphysical nihilism. Metaphysical nihilism refers to the belief that physical objects actually might not exist. So in other words, this type of nihilism questions whether our physical world is just a construct of our mental capacities. For example, in front of me, I have a Gatorade, and this color of green may not be the same color of green to you. And what it's trying to say is that the physical world may be just a picture in our brains that may not be real. Next, there is something called moral nihilism. And moral nihilism, or ethical nihilism, posits that actions and beliefs cannot be moral or immoral because no ethical basis can be established to gauge human activity. Right? So what they're trying to say is that there is no such thing as morality. And lastly, there is something called political nihilism. And political nihilism is a rejection of the validity of political institutions, whether real or imagined, based on the realities of the values these institutions claim to uphold. So basically, it's a riot against politics, and the EMMP of nihilism really come together as a new branch, solidifying what exactly is the meaning of life. So what a good way to memorize this is what I like to call EMMP. So if you think about it, it's like saying as in EMM, and then P kind of resembles a question mark. So it's stating the question, M question mark. Yeah, so that's one way to memorize it. And so to truly understand nihilism, it's important to immerse ourselves in the said existential crisis. So say that I was born 2008, August, and in this chart, I have already lived 761 weeks, and I only have 2,891 weeks left. A lot of time. Well, I've kind of used a third of it already. And then, if I surpass that time, my biological process would break down, and the dynamic pattern that is me is no longer dynamic. I will dissolve until there is no me. Okay, maybe there is an afterlife, but we don't know for sure. And perhaps we might stay dead forever. This is less scary than it sounds though. If you don't remember the 14 billion years that went by before you, then the trillions and trillions of years after you would just be a blip of a second, right? And after you die, after you disintegrate into nothing, the world will soon die after those years, and it would have been like nothing ever happened. So this is what nihilists are trying to say. But as for me, I think it's important to assign a sort of subjective viewpoint to this too. So how should we interpret nihilism in past, present, and future? Another way to understand nihilism. So nihilism is simply stating that nothing matters. Optimistic nihilism, however, is trying to say that since nothing matters, you're free to assign value to whatever you want. So you don't have to feel like you've wasted time. Say that you've played video games instead of studying, okay? But it made you happy, so it mattered. And if it mattered to you, you matter too. So put this simply, optimistic nihilism is like a hardcore Minecraft world. In the end, you die and everything you did in the game gets deleted. But you've conquered your world, you've built whatever you want, and you felt advanced and powerful. In the end, it'll all disappear, but so what? It was fun while it lasted, and that made it worth it. So, to summarize, nihilism incorporates origins from Latin, which means nihil, nothing, and tries to convey the idea that really there is no meaning to life. And the slow rise in atheistic beliefs only helped in strengthening the nihilistic community. And EMP, and perhaps nothing matters, but since nothing matters, we should be making the most out of it. Okay, so that's my presentation on nihilism. Don't forget to like and share, and check out more from WeLTS. Bye.